Good morning, students. I am Spriha Pandey. I would be taking one section of your syllabus of Indian legal and constitutional history, that is development of contract law in India. So now, before we start with this, let me just introduce what is the meaning of contract and just give you a small introduction about it. Now, when we talk about contract, so contract is one of the principal act governing all the contractual relation, not only in the business world, but also, in day-to-day activities. So it is one of the most important legislation ever drafted by Britishers, and you see the importance of it. It was drafted by Britishers, and still it is continued. Few portion of it has been omitted, but majority of it has been the basic principles of contract act are still valid today. So an act that was made during colonial period is still valid, and the principles enacted therein are nothing but the codification of general principle governing transactional relationship between two people, or two agencies, that we would be talking about later on. So it is a relationship, uh, you know that it is this particular contract act that it governs a relationship between, or transaction between, two or more individual, or two or more agencies. So the basic principle of contract law remains same throughout the world. Only certain technicalities remain different. So before the act was enacted, the contractual relationship was governed by personal laws of different religious communities, like different laws for Hindu, Muslim, and so on and so forth. So also at the time of Britishers, they had their own law to govern, but because of the presence of so many divergent laws, it created confusion in implementation of the contract and in case of any dispute arises between the parties. So to promote business transaction, Contract Act was enacted to make business transactions more convenient and more affordable. Now, what you're seeing here on the slide, a contract is a legally binding agreement. When we say any particular, if we talk about this particular contract act, it is legally binding. What does this mean? This phrase, legally binding agreement, this means that, if it is legally binding, that means the law has provided for this particular agreement, or the law has provided that the contract is a legally binding agreement. So there is a law that governs this particular law relating to contract and agreements. So a contract is a legally binding agreement that recognizes and governs. What does it recognizes and governs? The right and duties of the parties to the agreement. A contract is legally enforceable because it meets the requirement and approval of law. Now, when we study Contract Act, we know that agreement enforceable by law are contract. So these are those agreements which are legally enforceable. So if we talk about the three ingredients that we see here are, number one, that it is a legally binding agreement. Number two, it recognizes and governs the rights and duties of party. And number three, which is most important, that they are legally enforceable. Why? Because they meet the requirement of the law. Now, when we talk about Indian Contract Acts bring within its ambit contractual rights. That have been granted to the citizen of India. And it helps day-to-day activity. Also you are transacting. Two individuals are transacting. For example, you went in and bought a pizza, or you went to a McDonald's joint and just got a burger for yourself. What are you doing here? You are asking, this is also, you're asking for a burger. In return, you are giving money to him. So all these transactions need to be governed by a particular law. And everyday life transaction, that is evidencing the business of multinational companies here that I talked about, McD. So we need to have a law which you know suffice the purpose, and it not only lays down procedure of how it has to be done, but also it talks about penalties also, or what would be done if that contract is not fulfilled. So we have Indian Contract Act 1872, which was enacted on 25th April 1872, and this was the ninth act of that particular year. And it subsequently came into force on first day of September 1872. So the essence of Contract Act, as I told you earlier, was colonial, and it has modeled on the English common law. So if we talk about the history of this particular act, it brings to us notice, it brings to our notice that the origin of the economic process, and in this regard, the importance of contracting, in order to conduct one's business in everyday life, the act is very important. And the prevalent system in ancient time was barter, and it was based on the mutual principle of give and take. So this was confined to commodities as there was no medium of exchange. What happened in earlier period was we had barter system. Now, what was barter? It was just that exchanging goods for another good. So if we talk about contractual relationship, it started way back, when we had barter system. And it is, the, Contract Act was always based on mutual principle of give and take. So if you do not, if you only take or if you only give, then that is not contract. Give and take is what is regarded as contract. So this has continued, and the system still finds its relevance in the contemporary world, where it can be found in commercially and economically underdeveloped area, where still you find these old system, of when where they do not have much money, so they do exchange a commodity for another commodity. So if we talk about the development of contract law in India, so the to understand it in a better way, we have to analyze the historical evolution of contract law, also taking into account the practice that were prevalent before the enactment of this particular act came into practice. So we shall now be mainly analyzing the Roman period, to understand the common law principle, then the Muslim period, Hindu period, British regime, and then the present enactment. So, student, first we would be talking about the Roman period. Now, the earliest common law principle to contract law can be traced back during to the Roman period, where we always, hear about the 12 table law. So at that time, there existed different type of contractual relationship, and few of them have been stated here. Now, if we talk about, the relationship that were prevalent in Roman period, so they were basically, different contractual relationship that we talk about. Now, the first one that we talk about is the Ipsi Vrandam. Now, what is Ipsi Vandram? It is, something which indicate that Jupiter was the god which people generally swore. So here, what we talk about is a god. Jupiter was considered as a god, and people usually swore on Jupiter, during their normal transaction. So as per this contract, the promisor has to call upon the god. Who is the god here? The Jupiter, to declare verbally that he will bind by the rules of contract, and if he violates, he shall be punished. So the sanction imposed on the promisor include withdrawal of divine protection, which means any person can kill him. So what is happening here is that people are swearing on the god, and the moment they do not fulfill the terms of contract, and or they violate it, they are liable to be punished. And what is the punishment? The punishment is that now, since they have not fulfilled their promise, so the divine protection that was there on them is now removed, and that means that any person can kill that person who has violated the contract. Now, when we talk about sponsio, sponsio is this form of the contract which was similar to, FC Vandram, but it was different in regard to the stages in which contract was developed. So, in sponsio, at the very first stage, the wine was sacrificed to indicate the compact of alliance or peace made under the oath of the god. So, the first thing was they were sacrificing liquor. Then, second stage, or in this stage only, if we talk about the sacrifice, is used as an appeal to God in compact not made under the oath. And then it's verbal agreement implying accomplishment of wine sacrifice, but at the making of contract, no such action is taken. And then again, the punishment for breach of performance are decided by the priest and are abided by the parties of the contract. So understanding in Ipsi Vandram and Sponsio, the things are seen. What is happening is in Ipsi Vandram, the person contracting, they are just swearing in the name of the god, which is the Jupiter. In Sponsio, what is happening is it is divided into two stages. They are not only, they are, instead of swearing it in the name of the god, what they are doing is they are deciding that first thing they would do is give up wine. Okay, now this sacrifice, that is giving up of wine, is an appeal to the god, in compact, not made under the oath. And lastly, what they would do is there's a verbal agreement, implying the accomplishment of, the wine sacrifice, but at the making of the contract, no such action is taken. Then next we talk about is nexum. Now this mainly is related to loan and sales. So in loan agreement, the borrower had to declare himself indebted to the other party for the sum that he's taking as loan. And in the sales agreement, the sale can take place only in the presence of 5 people, and the amount to be paid is decided by the officials. So in case of breach of either of them, the creditor has the option to invoke any of the violent measures as inscribed in the law. So this is what is nexum. So nexum law is related to loan and sales. Again, I'm repeating. Ipsi Vandram is what people used to swear in the name of the god, and in case they violated, they would be punished, and any person could kill them. In Sponsio, they are giving up wine in lieu of that contract. Nexum is, it is a contract related to loan and sales. Then we talk about Dortus Dictio. Now, Dortus Dictio is something that is related to dowry agreement between the bride and the groom. And in this contract, the father of the bride or the bride herself set forth the amount and nature of dowry to be governed, or to be given to the groom, and it declares in the presence of the groom only. So since it was a social agreement, there was not any punishment prescribed for its breach, but the only remedy that the groom family had in case of breach was to compel the bride's family in fulfilling the contract. So what we today see is Dortus Dictio, or this is the dowry agreement that we talk about, but it was a social agreement, so there was no punishment prescribed to it. Then, apart from these, there were also other types of contracts that were prevalent in the Roman period, though not that much. The first were very prevalent. Then, lex manispi. Now, this contract was equivalent to the modern day law of contract, which is related to transfer of property. Fiducia, it is an ancillary contract to the above form of contract. Okay, so this was the law that were prevalent during the Roman period. Now, intention of the parties had to be seen. The Roman law followed the unilateral principle of contract law, as per which promisor was bound by the contract but wasn't entitled to anything from the other party. Then the consent of the party was based on divine approval. So now if I have to ask you one question, I know this is a monologue lecture, but if you could just take 2 minutes of your time and just ponder that what all developed, or what was the law regarding to contract during the Roman period, so we can come to only 3 conclusions. Number 1 conclusion is, if you just think, and meanwhile I'm just answering. So the number 1 conclusion is that the intention of the parties have to be communicated to both the parties. Now, if there are 2 parties, A and B, if they have the intention to contract, that intention should be communicated from A to B, and B, if accepting the contract, the intention has to be communicated to A. So this was one thing. Second, we learned from Roman law was that the promisor was bound by the contract but wasn't entitled to anything from the other parties. That happened in case of Dortus Dictio, that is related to dowry agreement. Then last, which is very important that we see in Roman period, was that the consent of the party was based on the divine approval. So this was the law relating to contract law. Now moving ahead, we would talk about Islamic period. Now in India during the Muslim period in India, all matters relating to contract were governed by the Mohammedan law of contract. Now the word contract in Arabic means aqd. Okay, which means a conjunction, and it connotes a conjunction of what? Proposal, izab, and acceptance, which is kabul. And a contract require, and if you know, before I move on ahead, you know that even today when we talk about Muslim marriages, this is what, you know, you hear, you know, kabul. So in fact, you know, the Muslim marriage was considered as a contract, which is still considered as a contract, you know, where there's a proposal by the, you know, groom, and the bride accepts it by saying kabul, kabul, kabul. So you know, if you see, you know, the contract law, you know, you know, what was the law relating to contract during the Islamic period. So a contract requires that there should be two parties to it. One should make the proposal, another should accept it. That is, one should make the izab, and another should make the kabul. And the mind of both the parties must agree. That is, declaration must relate to same matter, and the object of the contract must be to produce a legal result. Now, if we talk about you know, Mohammedan law, then Mohammedan, you know, obviously followed Islamic law, which are considered as divine origin and are believed as the revelations of the God, Allah. So according to Islamic law, every aspect of the civil law revolves around the contract, like contract for marriage, as I told you, or their contract for inheritance of property. So transaction related to any matter was, you know, treated as a secular contract, and provision for there to settle the dispute to every type of contract, you know, even property and succession. So you know, it when we talk about you know, Muslim personal law, then we know that you know, there were law to you know, govern specific contract also, which were, you know, like for contracts related to commercial, mercantile, or proprietary nature, like agency, wakalat, guarantee and indemnity, that is zamanat and tameen, partnership, that is shirkat. So you know that all these law were there during the time of Muslim period also. And another thing to be noted is that under Islamic law, even marriages, that is nikah, were treated as a contract, and till date the situation remains the same. Yes, I've already told you that you know, the nikah was, what happens in nikah. There is a proposal and there is an acceptance in form of kubul. Then the unlawful transactions were considered void from the beginning under the Muslim law. These types of transactions were divided into you know, categories that are given here. So riba, you know, al fadl. Now in this case, it's a contract which produced unlawful access in exchange of counter values in a contemporaneous transaction. Then we talk about riba al-nasiya. Now this means a contract which produced unlawful gain without completing the exchange of counter values. And then the other unlawful transaction was riba al-zahiliya. It's also called as prehistoric riba, where the you know, lender asks the borrower whether he will settle the debt or increase the debt. And you know, other than this, also the other form of transaction that was prohibited under Islamic law, and the same you know, was you know, have been also incorporated in the Indian Contract Act, were, you know, contract relating to gambling, contingent contract, or wagering contract. So these type of contract were called you know, gharar, and was strictly prohibited in Quran. So the basic principle which followed, and which is also retained in Contract Act today, is you know, with respect to future performance of an uncertain event, which was also considered as unlawful during Muslim period. Then when we come to Hindu law, or before we come to Hindu law, I would just like to, you know, drive your attention to certain things. Now when we conclude what all have been studied, you know, Roman period, we know there were three things. Now when we conclude Mohammedan law, we know that they were the law governed by the, you know, their personal law, and everything that was given in Quran were the dictates of the Allah. So you know, in fact, the very pious ceremony, that is the marriage, is also a form of contract under Muslim law. Then when we come to Hindu law, so the jurisprudential aspect of Hindu law is fundamentally different from that of English law jurisprudence, because Hindu law is a result of you know, compilation of numerous customs and plethora of works of Smritikars who interpreted and analyzed Vedas to develop the various aspects of Hindu law. So if we talk about Hindu law, we know that Hindu law was earlier governed by, Vedas, Shrutis, Smritis, and if we talk about the rule governing the contract form a part of a law which is known as Vyavhar Mayuk. Vyavhar is what we called as behavioral behavior. So that was also regarded, was there in the Hindu Contract Act those times. That is Vyavhar Mukh. So during the entire ancient and medieval period of human history in India, there were no general code governing contract. So principles were thus derived from numerous references, the sources of law, namely, I told you, Vedas, Dharmshas, Smriti, Shrutis, because they gave a vivid description of the law which was related to contract during those time. And then I told you that the rule governing contract form a part of a law which was known as Vyavhar Mukh. Now this is very important. Please remember this word, Vyavhar Mukh. Now, when we talk about Manusmriti, now I told you we were, the law was provided in Manusmriti also, and the Manusmriti regarding the contract law dealt with the incompetency of an individual to enter into contracts, and it's also laid down the principle which is followed in the Indian Contract Act that states that a contract entered by a minor or intoxicated person, or for that matter an old person, is not a valid contract. So what is there, when we talk about competency of contract, who is competent to contract, then we talk that he should not be a minor, he should be capable to contract, and he must be person of sound mind. All those things that we talk about in today's legislation was also there in Manu Smriti. Then when we talk about Narad Smriti, now regarding the contract by a minor on the Narad Smriti, an infant is considered as someone who is between the age of an embryo to up to 8 years. So after that, from 8 years to 16 years, the child is considered as a boyhood, and after 16 years the person is competent to enter into a contract. So a person can enter into a contract as per Narad Smriti only after attaining the age of 16. Today we have said it's 18, but you understand, see, what I am trying to tell you is how are we tracing the origin of this particular act. Then when we talk about the concept of liability in contract law, it's find its birth in the Vedic period too. Now we talk about rin many a times. We haven't done this, and this is a rin on us which we need to complete or fulfill. Now this was that this word which is known as rin, it was constantly reinforced by the Smriti that failure to pay back the debt meant rebirth as slave, servant, women, or a beast in the house of creditor. Then when we talk about the Kautilya, so the Arthashastra was regarded as one of the major sources from which law has derived. So the famous Indian philosopher Kautilya added to the list of disqualified person who are not allowed to enter into contract, and included a contract between husband and wife, or between parents and the son, or between brothers or brothers and sisters, or between slave and hired labor. So they were not allowed to enter into contract. And the Arthashastra by Kautilya, which is considered to be the only existing secular treaty on politics and government, talk about it. It restrains certain person to enter into a contract on moral grounds and economic factors. Then during Chandragupta period or reign, contract existed in form of bilateral transaction, that is between two individual or group. So the essential element of these transactions were free consent and consensus of all. That is consensus ad idem. I told you that our present contract act is also based on the same principle, consensus ad idem, that is consenting on the same thing in the same sense. And now it laid down that following contracts were void. As you can see on the slide, that these were the contracts that were void during that time. Now contract formed during the night, or contracts entered into interior compartment of the house, made in the forest, contract made in other secret places, contract made in celebration of marriage, and so on and so forth. Contract made under orders of government. So these all contracts were regarded as void contract during the Chandragupta reign. Then, what we today see as bailment also finds its root to Katyana Smriti, containing a special provision with respect to bailment. Then also, it is also interesting to note that there is no limitation for bringing out a suit for money lent. And this was because the rule of Damdupat, which is currently also prevalent in Calcutta, and it enjoys enforceability under the saving clause of section 1, which laid down that the amount of principal and interest recoverable at one time in a lump sum amount cannot be more than double the money lent. For example, if you lend 10 rupees, the interest and everything, if you add, it cannot be more than double the amount you have lent. That is not more than 20 rupees. Then when we come to British period, now Britishers came to India around 1600, and they started governing India through the medium of charters and different regulations. By the Regulating Act of 1773, the Supreme Court of Judicature was founded in Calcutta, replacing the Mayor's Court, and it served as the highest court of British India. Till the time High Court of Calcutta was established under the Indian High Courts Act. And now before the advent of Indian Contract Act, English law was applicable in the presidency town of Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. Now you see that we know that English law was applicable before this law came into being. Now what happened when after British regime, what happened was that year 1862 was the year when there was introduction of High Court in the presidency town of Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. And these charters, which created new High Court, contained the same provision about the law to be applied. But this was made subject to the legislative power of governor in council under clause 44 of Charter of 1865. But if we see this, if we see the time of Britishers, that there are a lot of changes that were there in the law. Now, if we talk about indiscriminate application of English law in governing the contract form, because there were different personal law which are prevalent, and they were quite inconvenient to govern the jurial relationship between the two individual or the two group. So to remove the legal barriers, the Settlement Act of 1781, as passed by Britishers, provided that matter concerning inheritance, succession, and contract between the parties in case of Hindu and Muslim were to be followed, governed by their respective personal law. But in case where one party is from either of the religion, if one party is Hindu and other is Muslim, then in that case, law of the defendant is to be used. Then in the year 1862, the introduction of High Court took place in the presidency town, and High Court to apply the personal law of respective religion before rendering any judgment in respect of contract cases. So the law applicable was the personal law of different communities during this period. Now, when we talk about the advent of Indian Contract Act, now Indian Contract Act as applied today was drafted originally by the Third Law Commission in the year 1861. And do you know where it was drafted? It was drafted in England. So the Indian Contract Bill tried to define law relating to contract, sale of movable property, indemnity, guarantee, agency, partnership, and bailment. And the bill was not the complete law of contract, but the major aim of the bill was to suffice the need of the country with for a considerable period of time. And during that period, judges of the court were taking the help of English law in determining the cases. So the drafters tried their best to imbibe the regular practice which were followed in India in the bill, and they drafted a particular act. But this aspect, many aspects that were prevalent during that time were not incorporated in the bill. The Indian Contract Act came into effect in 1872, but soon afterwards amendments were made in that regard, which repealed section 76 to 123 dealing with Sale of Good Act, and separate legislation were enacted called Sale of Good Act 1930 to govern that area. Also, section 239 to 266 dealing with partnership was also revealed, and a new legislation was enacted, known as Indian Partnership Act 1932. So, by analyzing all this, we come to know that what happened in Roman period, we know. Then we got to know what happened during Muslim period. Then Hindu, what happened in Hindu law. Then what was the law during Britishers. So there were, a lot of changes during all this period. But the ultimate, mostly what we saw was that the personal law were applied, with respect to contract. Now, by analyzing the development of contracts at different times, ranging from Roman law to Muslim law to Hindu law to legal sanctions in British regime, it can be inferred that though the technicality and modes and means of punishment may vary, even the applicability of law may vary, but the underlying principle of all the law remains same. And what were the underlying principles that were common for all? Minor cannot contract. Consent should be by both the parties. Consensus ad idem, that is consenting the same thing in the same sense. Certain person disqualified from contracting, like intoxicated old person cannot contract. Also, it can be inferred that Britishers tried to codify the law to bring in uniformity, but they also tried to incorporate personal law of different religious group unless they are contrary to the main law. So it can be said that through different time period, the contract law has been amended and interpreted in different ways in different communities, but the general principle has remained unchanged, and no attempt has been made to change it. And also, we did not find need for changing it because it was a successful law, right? So this is how the contract law has developed in India. Students, if you have any query with respect to this topic, please feel free to contact me either through mail or WhatsApp group. And also, this is a bit, technical topic. So you need to understand it in, different phases. Now, the first, I'm just doing a quick recap. Now, when we talk about the first period, that is Roman period, we know that it was a divine law. And people used to swan in the name of the god. They used to give up wine. And then we also know that there was few things for which there was no punishment attached, for example in case of dowry agreements. Then we come to Muslim law. We know that in the Muslim law, the most pious ceremony, that is the marriage, is also a contract. We talk about izab and then the kabul. So there was the whole law of contract was there. Then there was three uh, unlawful transaction also we talked about. Then moving to Hindu law, everything was governed by Shruti, Smriti and Manusmriti. We talked about Manusmriti, then Kautilya Arthashastra, then what happened during Chandragupta reign. Then even after that, what happened, Narad Smriti we talked about. So all that we talked about under Hindu law. Then we came to uh, British regime. Now we know that different charters were enacted, but still Britishers tried to also incorporate the personal law of different communities. And in case of conflict, the law of the defendant prevailed. So this was the law during Britishers. Then we came with the act, Indian Contract Act 1872. Now this act was later on amendment, and the law relating to sale of goods and partnership was removed from that particular act, and we formed a new act. So we conclude, or the inference that we get from it is that the law of contract, though has traveled a long way, but the basic principle in all these in the journey of development has remained same throughout. Like if we talk about the principle relating to who's competent to contract, it is also there. And the age restrictions, it was 16 earlier during some period, but now it's 18. So though the that number has changed, but in general the concept remained the same. So this was all about development of contractual law in India. Thank you, students.